Hello, everyone. Samuel David here, host of Rod and Ring Ancient Near East meets Modern West. On today's episode, I will be diving deep into the subject of Tiamat with special guest Solomon Pakal and Joseph Marsh. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So, Joseph, I've followed you since late 2014, 2015, I'm going to assume, when you were going by the name of Sorcerer, and then
Yep.
you changed your format and rebranded essentially as the Grand Infinity.
Yep.
And then you came back as Psycho Sorcerer 2.0, and
Yep.
I was kind of disheartened when you took your channel offline, and then I saw you pop back on, and I was like, what is happening? What's going on? What timeline am I in right now? Has the timeline healed itself? So yeah, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm really hoping that we can dig deep into the salty waters of Tiamat in
Of
this
course.
episode. I know that for many who view this channel, they know that the primary focus is the Mesopotamian spiritual current beyond the occult perspective, but I do also want to bring my fellow esotericists to the table that are adept in this mode of occult expression. So let's get down to brass tacks. I recall a ritual that you had done, and you had presented your findings about that particular spirit working. And the one thing that really stuck out to me was the, I think it was an incense burner that you had
Hmm.
that had shattered, and
Yeah.
then a door that had opened as well. So yeah, that at the time I had not been a out and out occult practitioner. I'd just pretty much been an armchair reader, and your content really inspired my esoteric pursuits in the realm of the occult. I was wondering if you could elaborate on what got you into that esoteric expression with regards to incorporating Tiamat into your praxis, and how that evolved over time.
Tiamat's always been the most interesting one of everything. As you know from following my channel, Tiamat has basically become like the everything that I've worked with for years and years and years. But that was never planned. That wasn't like something I came up with and decided to do. So I was working with the pantheon of Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Sumerian gods and goddesses. No thought of like working with Tiamat. That didn't strike me as one of the gods to work with at the time. And I was doing this thing where I was kind of overlaying them with the Tree of Life. So each sphere or Sephirah in the Tree of Life was being represented by a different Babylonian god instead. And I got up to a point where you were supposed to go to like the three at the top, and you have to cross over this sort of abyss
Mhm.
threshold. But I got caught in there. I didn't know about dot or any of that stuff then, but now that makes sense. I got caught in this middle place, and that's where I met Tiamat, was in the crossover across that section. And that's the form, at least, that this took, was the ancient Mesopotamian serpent, primordial, quote unquote, goddess of chaos. So then I kind of came back from that experience. That was one of the first times I felt a lot of fear working with one of these entities. Usually there's sort of like an anticipation and a fear whenever you try to do these things, but it kind of subsides whenever you're in the circle doing your thing. But that did not subside with this particular entity. So it was different. It felt like a whole different experience. And then I was at a point on my channel where I was like, okay, I got to do one of these things so that people can see what a ritual looks like, see what this type of experience looks like. I keep it all very private up until that point, but I was like, we got to do one. So I did that thing where I reached out and was like, what entity that I work with is willing to have me do this on camera? And only one answer, and that was Tiamat.
I know, Solomon, you have, granted, you're coming from a perspective of the Maya persuasion with venerating your ancestors and bringing that spiritual current from Mesoamerica into the modern age, making it accessible. You know, we've chatted about this for hours on end and contrasted and compared. But I was wondering if you would be able to share some of your experiences with the primordial serpent that is Tiamat.
Yeah, I mean, my experiences with Tiamat were highly personable and visceral. Like it was with Tiamat. So like when I was saying at this time in my occult career, I was doing more Western stuff and more contemporary magic stuff. Like I mention a lot of the Maya stuff, and I think it's relevant even here where it needs to be, just because part of my studies is the Maya Chaos Comp. So it has me reviewing all of my experiences with Tiamat in new ways, because the Mesoamerican ideas of chaos are super multifaceted, in more than just like you think one entity of chaos. I think really like Joe can attest to this too. Tiamat's much more multifaceted than his
Yep.
experiences from the past, right? Like I think when we were younger in our occult ventures, we saw it as almost like characters, like straight up
Yeah.
characters, one-to-one characters in a video game or something, or in a story. Whereas like the more advanced you get, it becomes this encompassing kaleidoscope of experiences. So when a little context, when I started working with Tiamat overtly, and I had worked with her for years, um, I have a background, like a family lineage of Latin American brujeria, but I was very new to the idea that you could talk about this stuff on the internet. And I was in my early 20s when I started exploring Western esotericism, or early to mid 20s when I started exploring Western esotericism. And so it's like, what's the second biggest search engine in the world after Google? It's YouTube, and I found Joe. So it's like
Hmm.
I turned to Joe's channel for a lot of information, not just Mesopotamian stuff, but something about oddly enough, I had actually been coming out of a conspiratorial Christian phase at this time when I was coming into Western esotericism. And part of my speculations at the time was like this there's this divine masculine in Christianity, right? But there's this absence of there's an absence of divine feminine, right? But there's speculations like that famous book that did God have a wife or something like that. Just all of these different things, and I actually found myself writing a short story about like a climactic battle to the end of the cosmos. This is now, mind you, this is before I had studied Mesopotamian stuff. I actually had thought I made up the character of like God's wife, and I was just like young and reading comic books and stuff, and I never saw the name Tiamat. But at one point, I thought I made up the name Tiamat, like Joe's channel, and just getting into more Western stuff. That there is this entity named Tiamat. Um, and then yeah, I started overtly communicating with this entity, and I found out that this entity, because it's so all encompassing, I actually heard this entity when I was a child. Whenever me and my mother would be walking in the streets of Washington, D.C., I would hear this spirit specifically at the end of every street corner. It was a woman's like voice singing. I've had a lot of visceral experiences, and I would go on to work with Tiamat in very lengthy magical operations for years, and I would get some pretty, I guess you could say, good tangible results. um, Things would take a turn, much like Joe said, the abyss kind of stuff happened very jarringly. Guess you could say it turned my life upside down. And it
Yep.
happened pretty much all of a sudden. There were signs that it was leading to theirs, not, in retrospect, but for years I had worked with this entity and its power and its idea of this primordial chaos that still permeates everything in existence. Like everything is in a flux of chaos. down to the little bits of separation between atoms. That's the chaos in between. It's an eternal thing, and it can take on a personage if you dare to summon it. But yeah, that's a little bit of my background with Tiamat.
So my question, I guess, that I always have to ask every single guest that I've chatted with, or anyone else within the occultist sphere that I have ever engaged with in conversation, what was it about this particular spiritual being, this entity, this intelligence, what have you, this archetype, this mask, whatever terminology you want to use to describe your relationship or reality to the other, what was it that brought you in, if you will, and made you feel comfortable about engaging with this intelligence?
You want to start, Solomon?
I would say, and it might sound a little weird at first, but somewhere between the ideas of eros and agape, because I mean, I live in I do real magic. I live in a world where magic is real. I come from a culture where magic is real. So some of these things I'll say, and they might sound like very strange and unbelievable, but Tiamat very much manifested as an actual person in my life, and that person had a relationship with Tiamat, like an actual like spirit relationship with Tiamat. They were not an occultist, but they became an occultist because of Tiamat, essentially. So I think there is this idea of certain divinities or humanities having a love affair with chaos. And there's some kind of allurement, a primal allurement or alluring factor that chaos has, because it's like half, if not more than half of existence. You know, it is existence. It's that bridge between existence and non-existence. So there's this it's like that lustful spark right before a romance. And it's like if the two partners of romance are existence and non-existence, then chaos is that spark in between. And things can go all kinds of right, or they could go all kinds of wrong with it.
Yeah, and I asked you to go first because I don't have a good answer for this one, because I feel like everything I say is going to sound either cryptic or whatever. Because when I first met Tiamat, not first, but when I started working with Tiamat and I asked why Tiamat appeared to me, because again, I didn't call to Tiamat the first time through. I was trying to jump across that chasm and she just came. And when I asked why she came to me, she said, because you'll work with me, as if she already knew that we were going to work together. So she showed up. So it was kind of like, she was like, hey, we're working together now. And I was like, I guess.
What challenges have you had with regards to this esoteric pursuit, this working relationship, if you will?
So Tiamat teaches you, just like most gods, if you're somebody who works with deities, by changing stuff in your life and making you go through it. So it isn't like, hey, I want something good, so you're going to bring me a positive change, so much as it's, oh, you're ready for a new test and challenge. Oop.
And as the personification of the salt, water, and chaos, I'm pretty sure that you got more than what you bargained for.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, would you be able to expound upon that or share in more detail, or is that something you prefer not to discuss?
I like to think of it sort of like the two different most notable aspects of something that you would think of as a dark goddess, which is there's a motherly nature, but there's also this chaotic, dangerous nature. And if you can bring those two things together, then you kind of understand the way she's going to push you, but not too far. It's like, okay, I got you, but I'm also going to make you do this. So it's like, you're ready for this, so I'm going to push you. And then you get a little reprieve after you've finished this task, and then I'm going to push you again. So it never feels like too much for you to handle. I mean, it does in the moment, But when you look back, you're like, okay, everything was in its own time, in its own place. And everything is, in my experience, because again, I should specify that I use these practices for self-development as opposed to, say, traditional magic. I used to be a traditional magic user where I would try to use it to bring stuff to me. And now it's more like I'm trying to change the self. And so these processes will say, like, oh, you've got this idea about how people are, or this idea about, I'm trying to think of a perfect example, but you think people that are, let's go with politics because that's hot right now. You think people on the opposite end of the political spectrum are just wrong. But how about I push you somewhere where you're going to see why they feel the way they feel? And you're going to go through some of their pain. And then you're going to come back and go, okay, now I can agree to disagree, but I understand you. And things like that, but continuously. And it makes it sound bad if I say it that way, because you think like, oh, you're going to keep going through this churn. But there is, again, reprieves in between. You'll go through it, you'll come out, you'll change. And as long as you do adapt and change and learn, there's a reprieve, and then you'll do something new. The times where it starts to suck is when you get firm and unwilling to change. And then she hits you with a slightly harder version and a slightly harder version and a slightly harder version until you finally let go of that and move on.
So in the past, I know that you had also presented material and discussed your workings with deities such as Marduk, who in the Enuma Elish are Tiamat and Marduk are, polar opposites. They're diametrically opposed to each other. Having said that, and your primary praxis devoted to Tiamat, have you experienced any pushback or any interpersonal conflicts within the scope of a magical practice that involves both of these figures?
So when I first started working exclusively with Tiamat, it was sort of like signing an exclusivity contract where it was, okay, I'm going to teach you, but you're going to work with me, and you're not going to work with any of the rest of these gods now. And so I got pulled away from all the rest of the Babylonian gods and goddesses and just working with Tiamat. It almost felt like it was a like, these guys are over here, but I'm over here, and we have different things we're doing type of thing. But over time, I came to understand that wasn't really, there's not really that separation. It's more like I needed to focus on one change. Like I was a person who was going month to month, bouncing around to different deities, trying to learn. I want to learn what you're like and incorporate that into me. I want to learn what this force means in the world and incorporate that into myself. But I'm going too fast. And Tiamat's like, slow down. We're just doing this. You're focusing on one thing now. You're getting good at one thing. And that's, a good thing. And I've reached a point now where it's opened up and I can work with other gods and deities and whatever again. But it's been what we were talking about earlier, almost 10 years. So for a long time, it was, you're not working with them, you're just working with me. And now it's, hey, you're firm on who you are now. You understand yourself. You understand what we are, what the separation is. You're ready to work with other entities without having these weird ideas of what they are, and understanding that they're sort of different lenses of looking at the kind of one greater eternity that exists. And by looking at it that way, in a sense, I'm still working with her when I work with one of the other ones, but I'm working with a different aspect of that greater eternity. Hopefully I didn't like way jump over what we're talking about by going that direction, but that's more or less what's going on.
No, not at all. Not at all. I want it to be as tangential as possible, or as concise as possible. Whatever guests prefer to discuss.
So I do have a different kind of opinion about what the Enuma Elish story really is.
Oh, here we go.
I don't have backing behind that. So it's one of those things where it's like I can't be like, there's proof of this thing, because the Enuma Elish is one of the oldest stories that we can see from the past. So anything I do to talk about what it would have come from has to be speculation, because it's prehistory, it's pre-writing. But I believe that the Enuma Elish is kind of like what happens with any story when it gets like codified into something. It's been changed from whatever its original format was. And I think that some of the language maybe has been moved to support a more patriotic, or not patriotic,
Patriarchal.
Yes, exactly, view of how things should be run, because Babylonian culture was patriarchal. So it put the king at the top. It says, like, Marduk said he wants to be king of the gods, so this is kind of the model with a hierarchy, and we're going to have the same hierarchy. It has all that in there. But if you look at it from very, very far away and you say, okay, we have this chaos being in the form of Tiamat, and we have Apsu, which is her lover, who you could think of as order. Think of it like the yin yang, two forces that have to intertwine with each other in order to make the entirety of everything. They're in a continual dance. As long as they're in balance, they're happy. But if one gets out of balance, the other one shifts to adjust. And they have these children, but that would be everything that exists, the gods, whatever. And the gods, if you read the story of the Enuma Elish, it says they were too noisy.
Mm-hmm.
And Apsu wanted to kill them. But Apsu is the order side of this. He wants to keep things stable. He wants them the way they were. And these are now beings that are chaos and order combined. So he's seeing all this chaos and he wants to do something with them. Well, the gods, maybe rightly so, kill Apsu and take him away. But what happens if you take all the order out and there's only chaos? It goes wild. And so then they have to come together in order to defeat this chaos. And that's as the story goes. But I think the later versions of the story have it that Marduk asked sort of for a reward in order to step in and fight Tiamat to become this sort of head of all the gods. I think that step of creating the hierarchy and order is how he defeats Tiamat. That it is the creation of a new order to replace the one they got rid of that can then spin and swim along with that chaos again. And so maybe instead of saying that they killed Tiamat, it's more like they subdued Tiamat. They brought enough order back in for the two to dance again and to bring things back into alignment. And I think that probably in the more matriarchal societies, there was a version of this that goes more like that. And that got changed a little, but more or less still holds most of the significant value. But that's based entirely on my work with Tiamat. So it's all like, what do you call it? Personal gnosis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any way to like verify that, but it does match sort of like Taoist thinking and other things where there's this dance and there's this union of the two order and chaos forces that, if kept in balance, is very good. And I would obviously love to get Solomon's opinion on chaos and order, because I know that in the Maya, you've talked about this before, they have a different look at chaos and order than a lot of people, with the extremes versus keeping them in balance. So
yeah, so that actually, it's very much like you were describing your current practice with her and seeing as super multifaceted. That's much like how mine is now. The more that I've dug into the various identities that the Chaos Serpent could take, and seeing how fundamental it is to creation now, or even to this day. So, like, for not to spend this all about the Maya, but just this enough is to get it to get the point across. In the Popol Vuh and in the closer to Aztec country, you have Cipacli, or in the Popol Vuh, you have Zipacna, Seven Macaw, Cabra Khan. They're all these giant chaos monsters, whether they're giant monstrous birds, they're kaiju, essentially. Like, and Tiamat's very much like a kaiju, right?
mm-hmm.
It's dragon. So there's these dragons or giant alligators. They're defeated by the hero twins. And then in some city states, they're defeated by the rain god Chak, who is wields an axe. He's very Jupiterian, very similar to Marduk.
Mm-hmm.
But so you have this literal like fighting the serpent and destroying the serpent. And the serpent has different names. There's another one that's called Itzam Kabain, and there's another one called Tamakaz. But regardless of the mythology, the Mayan calendar of 20 days is it's like the compass and interface of which any human can interact with the metaphysical world. And so like all of these day signs, every single spirit of the 20 spirits of the days represent fundamental forces within the universe that you cannot change. And one of the days is called Emosh, which is hearkening back to that time of chaos. It literally means like chaos and crocodile. That it's hearkening back to the chaos serpent. But the way that the day signs aren't not like we think personified characters. They're more like snapshots of mythological time to reflect on certain mythologies and the parables of the mythologies, and that those stories have consequences on their respective days. So, whenever I encounter the day of Emosh, I have to revisit these ideas of chaos. And like my experiences, my visceral spirit experiences with Tiamat, I was able to manifest a lot of great things, great clairvoyance, material gain, like stuff that you get into magic for and you hear success stories about. But there's no two ways about it. That testing stuff that Joe was talking about very much happened, but I'll just go ahead and say it further. So, like, she attempted to ruin my life, and what happened is, and we've talked about your experiences too. You enter in like a narrative. You enter in a living story. You enter in a retelling of the chaos conf, and where you have to defeat a chaos in order to keep the story going. Very much so. My situation was, if I did not solve this problem, where she was the antagonist, like there's no two ways about it. She became the antagonist of the story, and I had to participate with other gods to defeat this antagonist. But it was a retelling of the chaos conf. But the consequences were for me that if I did not finish this, if I did not complete it the way it was supposed to be completed, if I did not win, my life would have most definitely be ruined. I would not be talking to you today. So it was a very long and arduous task. And I think that's also a caution to like aspiring magicians, is that these things can have real consequences. And I don't mean like 1 or 2 weeks of consequences. I'm not talking 1 or 2 months of consequences. I'm talking about sometimes they can happen for a very long period of time. They will really get you questioning your life and your resolve. And you'll be like, how did I end up here? Magic's how you ended up here. So my experiences were definitely retelling that chaos conf where I had to be the dragon slayer. Whether it was like the hero twins or Marduk, this idea that there is that counterbalance to chaos, where you have to bring the order back in. And it was bringing that, it really was like how you said, Joe, with your latest theory about building that hierarchy. I had to essentially reinitiate through all of the gods and then find out what level of the narrative the gods, each one of these gods played. And now it took kind of like a fusion ritual space, because it was primarily Mayan gods that were my allies. Tiamat was the bad guy, but it was also like, this was when I was making breakthroughs in my research, where Tamakaz is one of the missing names of this chaos serpent in ancient Mesoamerica. And Tamakaz and Tiamat, I'm not saying there's any relation to the name. I'm not, but it's like, I was like, oh, it's funny how like people always talk about Zipakna and Zipakli, but they never mention Tamakaz. And that comes from Susan Milbrath's book, Star Gods of the Maya, from University of Colorado Press of Boulder. So it's like a legitimate source, but nobody talks about this name. So that name came up, and that became like the new visceral name. Essentially, I had to learn the secret name of the demon, so to speak, right, in order to defeat it. And it was through research and meditation that I found this name. So by finding her true Maya name, essentially, it became one of the weapons I would use to quote unquote defeat her in the narrative. But essentially, rebuilding that order, that hierarchy, was essentially my reinforcement. I guess kind of like my metaphysical armor against the dragon. And I would eventually defeat her. And, truth be told, it's like, again, we're talking real magic here, real spiritual encounters. There's some people that say like, oh, they're just kind of challenging you in life. And yeah, they are. But I'm going to be honest, like I was challenged in a way where it felt all personal. Like I did not like Tiamat at all after this. And it really, I was very hesitant about my ideas. I was very polarized when it came to order and chaos. I was like, I will not tolerate anything anymore. But, you grow, you learn, you get wiser, and you see that you have to live amongst chaos, because the chaos is a part of the things that like make us. Like we will be swimming in that chaos in space. We are right now, and everything will be until entropy dissolves everything.
Mhm.
She is kind of like that conscious entropy. And just like how the Enuma Elish finishes, where there's always going to be a watchman to look out for Tiamat, that's essentially the struggle of every celestial pantheon against their chaos serpent. They have to counterbalance the chaos serpent until
Yep.
the time comes for the narrative to pick up again.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in my experience, she wants you to be the one to make most decisions too. It's like you're going to represent order, but you have to become strong enough to counterbalance her. But at the same time, you can't become too strong because then you'll become sort of tyrannical and then
Yeah.
she'll turn into the monster and attack you, is basically how it goes. So it's all about finding that give and take between order and chaos, that sort of yin yang that we hear about in other religions and things like that, that finding how to be strong enough but not too forceful. And that seems to be what she's going for there. She mostly reacts to you, aside from, you know, poke, here's a new problem, poke, there's a new problem.
No, I completely agree. I want to caveat off of that really quick, because that is not just like a feel good message too. Like the ideas
Mhm.
of order, chaos, anarchy, and tyranny were all very there were adjacent concepts for me during this time. And what I mean by that is this: I experienced what many magicians would know or like recognize as like Gnostic styled archons, because I was a part of an organization that was highly, like, it would match our standards for archonic. But the thing was is that during this time I got to see how Tiamat was all chaos, and the gods, the celestial court, are order. But to the far right of that order is like is a megalomaniac of
Mhm.
a spiritual entity. And Gnosticism is very deep and convoluted, complex, many different sects. There's not just one type of Gnosticism. I understand that. But I'm just using the word Gnostic to kind of get the theme across here, because it's kind of like a vernacular, at least. Like, you think archons, you think tyranny, you think Gnostic archons. So I'm just using that for a vernacular right now. But I got to see really what tyranny would look like even after, like, post Tiamat, post chaos, and like what I could become, and how that was opposite to the gods as well.
Mhm.
And I was seeing like where I belonged in my own spiritual path, and my allegiance, and like where I fall into how I live my life is much more in line with the gods. And a caveat to that too is that I have when I mean gods, I do mean heaven, earth, and underworld. I'm not excluding the darkness at all, but the darkness plays an equal, but just like the heavens, is almost a seasonal role. So to have that, I want to say balance, but it's a harmony, really. It's like
Yeah.
because it will be asymmetric at times, and that asymmetry doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's cyclical.
Mhm.
So when I'm talking about, like, I had a very like mean experience with Tiamat, I'm not talking about like just dark deities. I'm not talking about that, because like there's many dark deities that helped me during that time,
Mhm.
and they continue to today, but they are a part of these cosmic seasons. So part of the Tiamat lesson, all in all, to answer that question, is that it's a very natural knee-jerk reaction to a yo-yo swing of like, I hate this chaos because it's ruining my life. We're going all right, like all to the right. And it's like, when you're going through something like that, yeah, you kind of want to do that because you're just freaked out and you might like lose everything. But then I learned my lessons from seeing entities of the far right,
Mhm.
and then it had me kind of recalibrate back towards a more central celestial order.
Harkening back to what you had said about the Enuma Elish, one thing that I really appreciate as I have done my own research and written my own material, the notion of cult diverging from myth is something that is
Mhm.
overlooked to a great extent. And while those who are in my spiritual community would view Tiamat as a deity who is outside of the the ordinary or outside of the norm, since she's only featured in the Enuma Elish.
Hmm.
One thing that I have found interesting is the increasing number of individuals who become more vocal in my community or join various groups or subreddits or discords or what have you, to discuss their own interactions with Tiamat. And sometimes I wonder if perhaps, and I don't know if either of you are familiar with this deity, but the name of this deity is Nama or Namu, who
Yep.
predates Tiamat, as the Sumerian mother goddess
Hmm.
of the sea. One thing that I think about is perhaps that is a means of this intelligence, this divine intelligence, what have you, of asserting itself in the minds of others, because we have Nama or Namu, who is wholly benevolent,
Right.
and we have, aspects of her as the mother goddess, the primordial mother goddess of water, um, appearing in to some extent in the guise of Tiamat in the Enuma Elish. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with this. It's tangential moment,
This
24/7.
this does maybe where you're going is sort of that the patriarchal shift that happened is that you can see in this other culture where we have Numa that she's never evil in that culture, but then here in the Enuma Elish we've demonized her. So
And what's interesting, you mentioned the patriarchal culture. What's interesting is what many people don't understand about the Enuma Elish is it was written as religious propaganda
mhm.
to substantiate the elevation of Marduk over all of the other gods and bring him into a position where his priests could exert power over the populace and influence politics. It's incredibly fascinating how we have that evolution taking place, yet most people just see the myth and just
Mhm.
draw the line at, oh, it's the creation myth, the de facto creation myth of the Mesopotamian people. No, it's religious propaganda, my guys.
It's also not even the earliest version of that story, so it's
Yeah.
like many years into the existence of Babylonia and all these other nations. So if you think about it with like a modern sensibility, you can realize like of course things change over time and the story you're getting there is not the original story. And additionally, you have to ask how much of it is made up and how much of it isn't. And at this point, the best you can do is look at it as a parable, I think.
Mm.
Um, if you're working directly with an entity like this, you'll get your own version of it. But again, that's not reliable for multiple reasons. So my understanding of it is sort of like what we talked about here, where it's more about this blending of order with chaos, but that comes entirely from the work. That doesn't come from any kind of historical backing. But yeah,
Mm.
you're right that Namu Nama was definitely a benevolent version of the same entity. And Tiamat can feel like that after you've worked with her for a while. She can just feel like a friendly energy. She feels very close to what people would consider like the all or eternity, because if you follow the ideas of the Enuma Elish that she became the very earth that we live on, then we're talking about, a Mother Earth style goddess as well wrapped into this. But that form, at least for me, didn't show up till much farther into working with her. It started out as big serpent, scary monster type stuff. But I think that's because of where I was at in my own headspace at the time. It was more like, I'm going to reflect to you your own inner fears, your own inner conflict. And then until you get those worked out, I'm not going to come down and look peaceful to you.
Mm. So literally going through that chaotic phase,
Yep.
that chaotic gatekeeper to get to a place of balance and more benevolent interaction.
And I've heard many people that have worked with her that have either similar experiences to Solomon or worse, where they're like, oh, I worked with her and she just like screwed everything up. Like she screwed my life over and then left, and that's it. And so I don't know exactly what to take of it because that's not my experience, but it sounds like a repeated thing that can happen. That if you work with her, there is a risk that you're just going to get your entire life thrown sideways. And if you don't do whatever you need to do in order to fix that, then you're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah, but I would say, like, even despite the differences in our stories, Joe, like I started off with her benevolent relationship, and then it turned malefic, right? Yours was the opposite.
Right.
I think there's enough repeating patterns with this entity
Mm-hmm.
to draw, at least from practicing occult perspectives. There's enough anecdotal evidence to build a case here. You know,
Yeah.
testing in a lab, that's not we don't do that, right? But like we have enough like notes from sorcerers, right? Or like metaphysical explorers that the theme rings true to this order and chaos thing. And yes, there's the thing is that if you go deep into any cosmology, go deep into any of the chaos comps, you'll run into this very similar concept because we come from the womb of chaos. Physicists now say that right before the Big Bang, in this inconceivable amount of time, there was a vast expansion, and then came all the stuff. So that vast expansion is Tiamat. That stuff is Apsu.
Yeah.
You know, pick your original divine masculine, original divine feminine, and plug them in there, more or less, and you end up with that. And just like in Tiamat becomes the earth, or the physical universe, however you want to say, same thing happens with all of these chaos serpents. So we come from the womb of chaos, and at some point it becomes the loving earth mother, or at least it's distilled to a point where, it's distilled to a point where it's almost basically a different entity.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than likely not the same. And like I've experienced this, like you bring up Nama, and Ishchel is like that for the Maya pantheon. Ishchel, Ishmukane, she has a couple of different guises. Her and the supreme god harbor this generally, like how from a Western perspective, benevolent feeling. They're like, by a Western perspective, they would be considered benevolent. But then you have these chaos monsters and stuff, right, that are there either debatably before them because chaos is formless. And it does have some kind of gender dissociation. There's always like this idea of masculine and order and feminine with chaos. And I think it just comes from like the womb of chaos from which everything existence comes from. It's like this dark chasm of nothingness until the bright light of somethingness comes along. I will say though, like if I may, my professional opinion on this is that when it comes to practice, this I don't want to say this is not for the faint of heart. I think is a very big understatement. I really would not, like, it depends on like what are you getting into magic for? Like if you really are to go to the extreme, I can't stop you. You know, you live your life. But if you are trying to better your life, like in more like sensible and understandable ways, there's nothing understandable about chaos. And I really would not, it's like taking the most indirect, hardest route to get to where you want to go. Just operationally, I think it's inefficient. Because the other thing is with an entity like Tiamat or any chaos serpent, take your pick, they are already in creation to some kind of very micro degree, because there's, again, chaos is in between our atoms. It is what causes separation in the universe to have forms. So chaos is necessary and it is omnipresent. So when Joe is saying about like the all and the grand infinity being Tiamat, I completely agree because chaos is there to distinguish form and to give shape and all of this. You will experience chaos at some point in your metaphysical journey. And I think it will be in sometimes probably radical ways. But I would venture that if you go about it in a healthy way with some wisdom, you will be able to make it out the other side of that chaos in digestible forms. I'm not trying to flex here, but seriously, a lesser magician and a lesser person would not have made it out of what I went through. And I don't think I would be serving your podcast correctly if I said otherwise. I wouldn't really recommend a conscious diving into Tiamat like that for the normal people. For most people, I wouldn't recommend it. Like, it's a very, I don't think Joe's a very extraordinary human being. I don't think most people would fit his life journey and like his circumstances. I don't think everybody should try to go that route. And that's my opinion. That's my assessment of it.
I fully agree.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic.
Definitely a heavy topic that we could discuss for hours and hours.
Well, that takes us full circle to when you asked why did I work with this being, and I said, I didn't really pick it. I think that is the natural way to end up working with Tiamat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think people who go looking for trouble can find it, but if trouble finds you, then you have to work it out. And that's kind of how, if you want to work with Tiamat, she probably should show up to you first. That's kind of my view on it. Unless you really just feel like you're the hot shit. I don't know what else to say other than that.
I mean, it's
really want to test yourself, then go ahead. But
even my circumstance, like, I thought I had made up the name Tiamat. I thought I was making up this character in a very very meta kind of way. I didn't know until I really recognized, because at this time I had abandoned magic. And I was more of a conspiratorial Christian. I was getting more into Christian mysticism. But then I thought I made up this character.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I made up this dragon, this wife of God, essentially. And it was mind-blowing to me that this thing was real. So that was looking back on it, like, I didn't choose it. Like, it was clearly implanting. And then if I take the narrative that this thing was following this, not this thing, but this very eternal spirit was following me through childhood, essentially, just like chaos is omnipresent, right? So it's very likely, but it was not things that I was conscious of. I was like, I didn't look at a Pokedex and say, I'm going to pick this one to work with. It was,
right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was very much out of my control. Like chaos is, it's like out of your control. It's the chaos of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think if you're consciously picking Tiamat, then that's probably wrong. You're supposed to unconsciously pick her.
Right, which is super helpful for the audience. They're like, hey, they're going to teach us something. We're like, no, don't do it unless it comes to you. That's the whole lesson.
The lesson is the spirit will choose the student,
that's it.
Not the other way around.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So given the rather unorthodox, if you will, even though there's no orthodoxy within the Mesopotamian spiritual paradigm, what challenges have you faced with your spiritual practice and its involvement with Tiamat when interacting with other people who are either polytheists or pagans or practicing occultists?
I haven't really run into much trouble there. Solomon and I get along great.
Yeah,
he's even had me participate in a Mayan ritual before, and that's fine. That was all allowed. So
yeah, I think that's down to the individual practitioner, to be honest. I think this, you can almost apply the same question to like just general working with people in the occult. And if they are, it's kind of like a test of who's level-headed and sensible. Because I remember there was times when me and Joe would talk about Tiamat, because that was much more closer to the time of chaos I was going through, where I could totally understand if Joe was like if I was sounding like abrasive at certain points. Like I was like stern on certain ways of thinking. But
you
even
were not
then,
happy.
Yeah, I was not happy, right? But I knew that there was something. Joe was a good practitioner. You could tell by the way he talked, and the way I talk was, see, we can have difference of opinions, but we can still learn to kind of coexist with each other, and then pick the bits from each other's wisdom, because this is a soft science at best. It's the softest science at best, right? So to be dogmatic about it it's ridiculous. It's like to be dogmatic about like how they've been about religion for ages at this point, and there's no point in like being at each other's throats for things that we cannot prove. It's more of an art than it is a science. So, you take the art for what it is. It's also kind of like I've done a lot of work across cultures, being in different countries and whatnot. So it's like I think I can learn to disagree, but then value certain things about the person's perspective. But no, when it came to me and Joe, and I've had interactions with other magicians, occultist practitioners, where if you have a difference of opinion, it's over. It's just like they don't see it that way. But the psycho sorcerer has never been that. He's always been an explorer and has always been questioning his reality, and questioning at every step of the way and the objectivity of it. So I think that's really down to the individual practitioner. And, I believe Joe's a standout practitioner amongst the best.
I appreciate that.
He's demonstrated that since like 2014, like on the web, he's documented this. And with very touchy, because very emotional subjects, you get into things like this, these are very emotional subjects. You have to have a bit of self-discipline. And this goes for anybody, but especially when you're talking themes of chaos, talking themes of passion. Like you gotta have some self-restraint and be like, okay, maybe this person believes a certain way because that's the only information that they've been given for the longest time, and it's kind of my responsibility to at least just hand over my perspective, and then we see what can happen in a discussion. How that happens, we'll see where it goes. And in like our case, we've had differences of opinions for like at least 30% of the Tiamat discussion, and we've remained friends throughout. I think nowadays our perspectives are much more in line. I think it's just because like my research and my developments as a practitioner and his development as a practitioner, they're kind of like meeting a fork in the road.
Yeah, we've both changed a lot since we first were talking. So I definitely came from a point of view originally where I was kind of over the moon about Tiamat. I was like, Tiamat's the best, Tiamat's the greatest. And I was still early into it for a while. And then you get smacked down a few times and you start to like learn the direction you're supposed to go. And it wasn't for a long time that I really understood that this order aspect of it was a big part, where you have to represent the order. Like Tiamat is teaching you how to deal with chaos, but that doesn't mean you give up on order. It means you still have to be like any human, in balance. But she's going to help you figure out where that balance is from the perspective of the chaos side of it. And that means you got to bring all the order yourself. Now, does that mean you should go do stuff like try to summon her in a triangle, like, that type of stuff? Absolutely not. You're going to learn the hard way. That's a bad idea. Does it mean that you should try to order her around or send her on tasks? Absolutely not. But it means that when it comes to stuff in your life, you're going to have to take charge of it. She doesn't do it for you. She's like, I'm going to give you the challenge, but then you have to figure out how to solve it. And you have to bring that level of order in order to step up and do what you have to do. And if you even go so far as to try to sort of like venerate her or like create an altar or like wear symbology and stuff, she smacks you down for that. At least that's my experience.
That's my experience too. No, it's
like no, I'm not that. I'm not order. Do not put me in a hierarchy. You can't put me up here. You just have to work with me. Like I'm everywhere. You work with me. The end. And it's very strange because other deities are fine with you venerating them, putting them above yourself. But Tiamat won't allow that.
Yeah, no, I really think that's there's an attitude that's developed in the last like maybe 15, 20 years in the occult of like, leave incense out for 30 days. You treat them like a partner, like some kind of business partner or a friend, and they will treat you amicably in return. That's not all spirits, and that's not all gods. Even not all gods look, all gods may be constituting as spirits, but not all spirits are gods. And I wouldn't even say, like, in my honest opinion, I don't the goddess term for Tiamat is way too limiting. That I don't think she's a goddess. She's not like a platonic concept that fits in the hierarchy, exactly like you said. Things like think your planetary model, think your pantheonic models of gods. Those are essential concepts of existence, existential order, and she represents the dismantling of that. So she's outside of that, very much like, I guess you could say, the Oth or something, or maybe beyond the tree altogether, perhaps. Regardless, it is a dismantling kind of force, and it doesn't matter how much you kiss its ass, so to speak. It's not going to do that. Like people want to think like, oh, I'm just going to devote to be this dark goddess mommy figure or something, and
it doesn't work.
Just going to give her everything that anybody can want. It's like that. You don't understand. To the endless, everything doesn't mean a thing. And like, even if you were like the white knight type and you're like, I'm going to put this in a triangle, you're never going to have the opportunity to put it in a triangle. You don't understand that, like, the power that this it's not even this thing as if it's like some unknown. It is what it is and always was and always will be. Like, you can't compare to that. So to try and treat it like a goddess, like a regular goddess, I think is inaccurate. I think it's just ignorance of like what it truly is. And it's okay to kind of be ignorant of it because it's so beyond us. But it doesn't mean that you should be trying to pal around with something that's beyond you. That's to say for a lot of things in the occult, right? There's just like faulty approaches of operating with these things, and Tiamat's really one that you don't want to do that with.
You'll know if you do it wrong.
Yeah. I just like I would really urge. I don't know if many people would make it back. I'm really not trying to sound extreme or edgy. Like, Tiamat is like the most dangerous thing I've ever done in my life. So I mean, there's nasty things out there, right? It's hard to say if any of them compare in my experience. And I've seen some nasty things. So
I think also something worth noting, though, is that I haven't heard, even though Tiamat shows up to you, I haven't heard stories where people get screwed over by Tiamat without opening the door, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's like,
yeah, no,
Tiamat's like, hey, do you want me to help you out? And you say, yeah. And then now there's a challenge. And once you've opened that door, she might challenge you more and more and more and more and more. But she doesn't just like show up. It's not like, oh, I'm Joe Schmo and I'm happy and have a great life. And then Tiamat showed up and wrecked my shit. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. No.
It's like, hey, you know what? I saw this being and I want to follow this further. And now I get whatever I get because I chose to do that.
And that's still a very rare occurrence too, because it's like, how many people are they see something like that and they're like, they know what to do. Like, they feel enamored to the point of like following it, So even that it's a rare occurrence, but it's like, maybe, there are more occultists coming to light now, right? Because there's more information available and people are questioning their realities more. So it's kind of by default. It's a numbers game that, yeah, more people are going to hear about Tiamat because more people are hearing about spirit stuff in general. I think, though, it's like the responsibility of like people in our position to kind of educate people about like what these things are and what they are not, because the occult and spirit world is so diverse. But when you're talking things like Tiamat, you're talking the absolute apex, like the furthest extreme that I think we could possibly imagine. If you want a more visceral idea of what Tiamat is without getting into like the ritual chamber, look at some astrophysics videos, man. Like, look up heat death and like these like how the universe ends. Look up like how the universe ends. That is like as real as it gets. The entropy, the law of entropy and chaos, like to the point where every atom in the universe will be dismantled at one point. That is Tiamat. Is the eventual separation of everything until it dissolves into that black ocean.
Yeah, and we talked about my old channel, the one where back in the day I had 20,000 subs and I was like rolling strong and everything else, and how eventually I took that down and then came back as this new channel several years later. But people don't always know what happened in between. I went through what most people would call a dark night of the soul, where I went into extreme existential dread and had to deal with basically that coming face to face with death type of thing that I think, Solomon, you're kind of pointing toward, where recognizing like insignificance and bleakness and loss and the eventuality, even if there is afterlives and whatever, that still wouldn't mean that you exist forever, things like that kind of finality and everything else was something that I had to go through as part of this path. So if that doesn't sound like a great time, then maybe don't do it.
That's the death of the gods too. You think about
Yeah,
it. So like you think about the solar concepts at some point in the universe, some point in the future, every star will be gone.
right.
Like so all of the ideal gods and archetypes that we identify with them, whatever, Helios, Saint Michael the Archangel, they will have been consumed by the womb as well. And it shouldn't be like in like some edgy romanticizing version of it. Like these things are supposed to horrify you because you are human. You are meant to be a balance of order and chaos, and to be one or the other is to not be human, and that's to not
Right,
be healthy. That means you're not healthy.
right.
But these things will happen. Like that's actually like essentially science has proven Tiamat exists, at least in like the very physical sense. It doesn't have to be a dragon. It is like the metaphorical dragon that everything will face one day. And it's the dissipation of all concepts, even all like physical concepts will be gone. That like very cosmic existential dread is a part of the Tiamat lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So if that doesn't sound like a good time, like that's not it's like people get their occult practice from going to Hot Topic. That's not a Hot Topic kind of time even.
Right.
Like
It's gonna get real quick.
yeah.
So, as we come to the end of our time together, what words of wisdom would you, aside from what we have already expounded upon, what words of wisdom would you like to leave for viewers and listeners?
So adaptability is a key. One of the main things, if you end up working with Tiamat, is that she wants to teach you to become more adaptable, more able to change. And that kind of comes in two stages. The first one is acceptance of whatever's going on, and the second one is deciding to make a change. And so you've got that acceptance of the chaos and then an ordered decision. And if you can get into a mode of that feeling like a normal thing in day-to-day life, these challenges are going to go by faster. They're not going to take as long. They're going to be easier. And that's kind of part of the point. And the other thing is that existential dread thing is getting over it, getting to that point where you can find your own reason for being that's kind of outside of perceived what do you say, like it's not like God says do this, so that's why you live. It's like I enjoy life for these reasons, and you start living according to that. That's how you get out of that existential dread. So those two things would be the main things you're going to end up learning over time. And I don't think you have to learn it from a chaos primordial in order to do that. But if you want it that way, then she'll show up.
Yeah, the to caveat on the lesson there of the cosmic dread, the thing is that like it really gets you to appreciate the now, and like to really like you're existing now. So like just do your life right now, like live your life right now and make the most of it. The idea that everything is going to be all right at the end of the story is a construct of, it's more aligned to like contemporary religion than it is like the nature of the universe. And pagan religions were better suited to the nature of the universe than contemporary religion. I'm not going to say everything was flawless. It wasn't flawless, right? But it was like definitely they were more in tune with nature, right? So why not break away from contemporary mainstream religions, like everything's going to be all right, and break away for the truth? And the truth is that as wonderful and as eternal, really, as the gods are, there is an eternity of darkness that we will eventually return to. But there's also hope, and physicists believe in this as well. For some reason, they believe that heat death perhaps has happened before to a universe that predates us. So something came from that nothing. That is the triumph, like that the practitioner has to take. The gods took the same mantle of becoming the order out of that chaos to like literally reform and create new atoms from where the old atoms of an eternity before were destroyed. That is truly a miracle. That is truly hope. So everything will die, but it has the potential to rise again. That is a part of the parable of, and I don't want to say it's just Tiamat, because it is, but it's this idea of the chaos conf. And I think like that's the best way if you want to practice with Tiamat. It's not to practice with Tiamat as a personified entity. Like Joe said, you don't have to go to this stuff for that. It's best that you don't really, but you can. I'm still learning from the chaos conf, and I can observe it from a healthier vantage point than I was before when I was trying to just be very evocative with my practice, like just like one-to-one, like this is what magicians do, right? No, I can relate to the chaos conf of like Leviathan and Yahweh and Marduk and Tiamat and the hero twins and the chaos monsters, and I can see it from a whole new place of wisdom, and I'm still learning from that. I can learn from it in its place of mythological time in the Mayan calendar and the day sign of Emosh. I have to live with it. I have a new talisman actually that was crafted out of a rose-colored jadeite from Guatemala, and it has the day sign for Emosh. Crocodile, the chaos serpent, is one of the 20 day signs, but I have to develop a relationship with that if I'm going to count the days, do the daily rituals, and become in tune with the universe. That's what the calendar is all about. Becoming in tune and in harmony with your surrounding universe, because this universe is living and we have to live in it, and we can live a happier life if we live in it. But if I have this grudge match against chaos all the time, that's not living in harmony. That's holding myself back. It's creating a, it's like what Buddha says about hatred and poison and keeping and drinking all the poison yourself. So that is my most, I guess, like practical tip, is that if you want to work with Tiamat, I think you really just, you want the lessons of order and chaos, and you can do that from a safe distance by studying the chaos conf myths of respective cultures. Because as we said, like the Enuma Elish, its documentation is problematic. So I think in this case, the chaos conf is so ubiquitous across cultures. I don't think it's going to take away from your practice if you studied Indra and Vitra. I don't think it's going to hurt at all to study just the various chaos conf, the dragon slaying myths across the world. I think it's just going to enhance your gnosis of the themes. But I don't think you should take that as like an invitation to have a working relationship with like an entity like this one-on-one. Yeah, I think the true gold's in the chaos conf. That's how